and walk out into the cold night. Rachel realized something that scared her more than the town's cruelty ever had. She wanted to believe him. The trading post fell quiet in a way that hurt. The auctioneer lifted the apple pie high, and the lantern light shined on a crust baked to gold. You could smell cinnamon and wild honey drifting through the room. Men who had been laughing a moment ago stared at the floorboards. Women leaned close to whisper. And Rachel Mae Hollis stood there with her hands clasped tight, waiting for even one hand to rise. Her cheeks burned as if she stood too close to the stove. The fiddle kept playing somewhere, softer now, like it knew better. The auctioneer cleared his throat and tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. Rachel swallowed hard, fighting the urge to grab her pie and run into the cold. If she left, she would give them exactly what they wanted. If she stayed, she would have to survive the silence. The Autumn Harvest Festival had started with the same bright noise it always did in Elk Ridge. A crisp October wind pushed wood smoke through open windows. Pine and fallen leaves mixed with warm sugar and butter. Folks packed the wide room shoulder to shoulder, boots thumping on the plank floor, children weaving between legs like eager pups. Rachel had arrived early, because early was safer than walking into a full room where every eye might turn. She set her basket on the long table where the pies waited, each one wrapped and dressed like it was headed to church. Rachel's was heavier than the rest. Not because she used more than she could spare, but because she refused to make anything small unapologetic. She laid a red and white cloth over it and tucked cinnamon sticks around the edge like a simple crown. Her hands were rough from scrubbing other people's shirts and mending torn coats, but when she baked, they moved steady. Baking was the one place her grief could not break her rhythm. She had climbed above the timberline for the apples, up where the wind stayed sharp and the rocks did not care if a person slipped. The young wives in town talked about sore feet and turned back at the first steep slope. Rachel kept climbing. Her knees ached. Her lungs burned. But she gathered the wild apples anyway, one by one, as if each one was a promise. At home, she mixed the spices with careful love, cardamom, nutmeg, and a dark honey she saved for special work. The recipe had been written in her late husband's hand, on a piece of bark paper he kept flat inside the family Bible. Levi Hollis had died 3 winters ago in a mine collapse, along with 8 other men. When the news reached town, people had cried with her. Some even held her hands in the church aisle. But tears dry fast when a widow stops being useful to the story people tell themselves. Before Levi died, folks called her Mrs. Hollis with respect. They asked for her recipes. They ate at her table. They praised her laugh. After Levi died, she became Rachel, then that widow, then worse, in softer words. Too big, too poor, too alone. A woman without a man to stand beside her in public. That morning, she heard the words before she saw the faces. "Well now," a sharp voice said, bright as a blade. "Look who's entering again." Rachel turned, and there she was, Darla Wren. Newer to Elk Ridge, but already acting like she owned the place. Darla stood near the fabric bolts with 2 women Rachel used to sit beside in church. Darla's dress was store-bought, fitted neat at the waist, clean as if dirt was something she refused to touch. Her smile held no warmth. Rachel kept her gaze calm. "Yes, ma'am." "I brought a pie." Darla's eyes slid over Rachel like a slow insult. "Brave of you," she said, and the women beside her let out little giggles. Hope is a sweet thing, even when it has no reason. One of the other women, Lydia Kroll, covered her mouth as if her laughter was modest. "Maybe somebody will bid enough to cover the flour," she said. "And the apples," the third woman added, "if she didn't eat them all first." The words landed hard. Rachel felt heat climb her neck, and for a second she wanted to shout. But shouting would only make her look wild. So she did what she always did. She swallowed it. She tied her cloth tighter. She pretended their voices were just wind. And she was a mountain that did not move. Outside, the boardwalk creaked under boots and wagon wheels. Rachel stepped out into the afternoon light with her basket handle biting her palm. Gold sunlight spilled over the peaks. turning the pines dark and proud. That beauty used to steady her. Now it felt like the world showing off what it still had, while she counted what she lost. Halfway down the walk, she saw a small boy frozen near the hitching post. His sack had split and apples rolled in the dirt like marbles. He stared at them, panicked, because food was not something a family like his could waste. His mother sat up on the wagon seat, tired-faced and tight-voiced. "Caleb," she snapped, not even looking back. "Pick them up. You hear me? Do you know what those cost?" The boy dropped to his knees and grabbed for the apples with shaking hands. He was too fast, too desperate. His fingers were small and clumsy, and the apples kept rolling away. Rachel set her pie down without thinking. She lowered herself slowly to the ground, knees protesting, skirts stretching against her legs. The dirt was cold and packed hard. She reached for the apples, one at a time, brushing dust off with the edge of her apron. "There," she said softly, placing a clean apple into the boy's hands. "Still good. Dirt washes. Food don't grow back easy." The boy looked up at her with wide eyes. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered, like kindness was something rare enough to surprise him. "What's your name?" Rachel asked. "Caleb," he said. "Caleb Ransom." Rachel nodded. "You tell your mama you did right to bring apples home." "That's honest work." The mother clicked her tongue at the horses and pulled the wagon forward without a word. The wheels rolled. Caleb stumbled to follow, clutching his apples. He looked back once, like he wanted to say more. Then he ran to catch up. Rachel stayed kneeling in the dust for a moment, watching the wagon disappear. A kindness given and forgotten. That was her life now. Still, she stood again, slow and stiff, and lifted her pie like it was something worth carrying. On the edge of town, 3 young trappers spilled out of the tavern, laughing too loud. Their faces were flushed from whiskey. One of them called out, "Hey, Widow Hollis, you bringing a pie tonight?" Rachel kept walking. Another said, "Don't waste your sugar. Nobody's bidding on that." The third laughed and said something meaner, something meant to make the others howl. Rachel did not turn. She did not answer. She walked on, because she had learned that cruelty fed on response the way a fire fed on dry wood. By nightfall, lanterns lit the trading post like a warm box in the cold. Music and laughter poured out through the cracks in the walls. Rachel paused at the steps and took one breath that felt like it scraped her throat. Then she walked inside. The pies sat lined up like prizes. Braided crusts, sugar-dusted tops, fancy little dough leaves. Women clustered in bright knots of conversation, their voices easy and sure. Rachel stood at the edge of the room with her basket, feeling like a shadow in her own town. The auction began. One pie sold, then another. Bids flew up fast. Men clapped each other on the back. The women who won attention blushed like they were girls again. Rachel watched it all like she was behind a window. Then the auctioneer lifted her basket. "Now," he said, trying to sound cheerful, "here we have a fine apple pie from Mrs. Rachel Hollis. Smell that spice, folks. Let's start at $4. Silence, thick and heavy. He tried again at 3. Nothing. Rachel's ears rang. She stared at the knot in the floorboards at her feet, because meeting eyes would break her. She could feel Darla Wren's smile from across the room without even looking. She could feel laughter being held back like a cough. The auctioneer shifted, embarrassed for her, but not enough to save her. "Well," he muttered, "we may have to move on." Rachel's fingers curled tight. She could still leave, she could still snatch her pie and walk out into the dark, and nobody would stop her. Nobody would care. Then a voice came from the back of the room, low and steady. $12. Every head turned. A man stood in the doorway shadow like a tree that had learned how to walk. Tall, broad-shouldered, coat worn from weather, beard touched with gray. His eyes were calm, the kind of calm that did not ask permission. Rachel's breath caught, because she recognized him. Months ago, on a high trail near her cabin, she had found a stranger thrown from his horse, blood on his temple, alone with the wind. She had helped him inside. She had fed him. She had asked for nothing. He had thanked her once and vanished into the mountains. Now he stepped forward, and the room held its breath with her. "I said 12, the mountain man repeated, looking straight at Rachel like she was the only person in the world. "And I'll pay it in cash." Rachel stood still, pie still on the table, heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat, because she did not know what would hurt more, being saved in front of them, or finding out this was another kind of joke. And as the mountain man took one more step toward her, she realized she was about to find out. The trading post stayed frozen in silence as the mountain man walked down the center aisle. His boots struck the plank floor with slow, heavy sounds. The topics and laughter that had filled the room a moment ago vanished like smoke in wind. Men straightened. Women stopped whispering. Even the auctioneer forgot his practiced grin. Rachel Mae Hollis could not move. Her hands were cold, but her face burned. $12 was not a polite bid. It was not a friendly gesture. It was triple what the auctioneer had asked for. It was enough money to buy flour for weeks, coal for the stove, and a little peace she had not known in years. The man stopped near the table. Up close, he looked older than she first thought, maybe in his mid-40s, with skin roughened by sun and snow. His coat smelled faintly of pine pitch and campfire. His eyes were a steady gray, not soft, not cruel, just steady. The auctioneer blinked like he had been slapped awake. "Sir," he said carefully, "you mean $12 for Mrs. Hollis's pie?" "That's what I said," the man answered. A cough sounded from the front benches. Darla Wren leaned forward, her lips curled into a thin smile. "Maybe he didn't hear who baked it," she said, sweet enough to fool a child, not sweet enough to fool anybody else. The mountain man turned his head toward her, slow and calm. "I heard," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried, the kind of voice that did not need shouting because it expected to be obeyed. Darla's smile flickered, just for a second. Rachel's throat tightened. She had waited 3 years for someone to defend her, but now that it was happening, it almost felt dangerous. In Elk Ridge, kindness came with strings. A favor could turn into a debt. A public gesture could turn into a joke by morning. The auctioneer cleared his throat and tried to recover the room. "Well then," he said, lifting his hand, "do I hear 13? No one spoke. The mountain man did not look back at the crowd. He reached into his vest and pulled out folded bills, worn from travel but real. He counted them onto the table, one by one, with no hurry. That made it worse for the watchers. They had time to see it, time to feel it. Rachel stared at the money as if it might bite her. "Name's Silas Granger," the man said, finally turning his gaze back to her. "You made this pie." Rachel blinked. The name meant little to her, but the face did not. She knew that face. She knew the cut above his eyebrow, a pale line like a lightning scar. She remembered washing the blood away with warm water in her cabin. She remembered him waking with a hand already reaching for a knife, then stopping when he saw her and realized he was safe. "You," she managed. Silas gave a small nod. "You helped me on the Ridge Trail in June. You fed me when I couldn't stand straight. You didn't ask my name. You didn't ask what I had. You just helped." Rachel's chest tightened. She heard murmurs ripple through the room, the kind that carried both shock and disappointment. People did not like stories where the wrong person got honored. Darla shifted, searching for control again. "That was kind," she said, voice dripping with fake respect. "But surely you don't mean to make a spectacle of the auction." Silas looked at her, and the air between them turned sharp. "I'm not the one who made it a spectacle," he said. A few men near the back lowered their eyes. They knew exactly who had. The auctioneer swallowed. "The pie goes to Mr. Granger for 12, he announced too loudly. "A fine bid, a very fine bid." A thin clap started somewhere, then stopped. No one wanted to be first to celebrate Rachel in front of the women who had been laughing at her. The room settled into an awkward hush, like a church after a hard sermon. Silas picked up the pie basket carefully, not like it was food, but like it was something made with love. Then he surprised Rachel again. He held out his arm. "Mrs. Hollis," he said, polite and steady, "would you sit with me and share it?" Quote. Rachel's breath caught. Her first instinct was to refuse. Not because she did not want to, but because she could already feel the eyes on her back. She had lived under those eyes for years. They watched her walk. They watched her eat. They watched her grieve. They waited for her to slip so they could call it proof. But she also felt something else. A small, stubborn spark that had not died. The part of her that had climbed the rocky slopes for apples. The part of her that had knelt in dust to help a boy who was not hers. If she turned Silas down, she would be agreeing she did not deserve a seat beside anyone. Rachel lifted her chin and took his arm. A sharp intake of breath swept the front benches. Darla's face tightened like a pulled string. Lydia Crowell whispered something behind her glove. But Rachel did not look at them. She walked with Silas toward a small table in the corner, away from the auction platform but not away from the stairs. Silas set the basket down, untied the cloth and folded it neatly. His hands were large, scarred, built for axes and rope, but he moved careful. Rachel watched him without meaning to, because no man had ever treated something she made like it mattered, not since Levi. When Silas lifted the cloth, the room filled with the warm scent of apples and spice. A perfect crust, browned and flaked. Small vents cut in the top like tiny leaves. Silas stared for a moment, then let out one slow breath. "That smell," he said, almost to himself. "It takes a man back." Rachel's voice came out small. "It's my husband's recipe." Silas looked up. "Levi Hollis." Rachel flinched at the sound of his name on another man's tongue. "Yes." Silas nodded once. "I knew him, not well, but I traded with men from that mine. Folks said he was steady. Folks said he treated people fair." Rachel swallowed. The pie on the table suddenly felt like a gravestone and a gift at the same time. "He did." Silas cut a slice with a pocket knife that had clearly seen rougher work. He set the first piece on a tin plate and slid it toward her before taking any for himself. Rachel stared at it. She could not remember the last time someone offered her the first share of anything. "You don't have to," she began. Silas shook his head. "I want to." Rachel took the fork. Her hand trembled, and she hated that it showed. She took a bite, and the warmth hit her tongue like a memory. The honey, the spices. The way Levi used to close his eyes and smile when she got it just right. Silas tasted his own bite, chewed slowly, and then stopped like something inside him had gone still. "That's the best pie I've had in 20 years, he said, plain and honest. Rachel let out a breath that sounded too close to a sob. "You paid too much." Silas set the fork down. "No." He said it like a fact, like the sky was blue and the mountains were tall. No argument, no pity. Rachel forced herself to look at him. "Why did you do it in front of everybody?" Silas held her gaze. "Because they needed to see it." Her stomach tightened. "See what?" Silas's eyes did not soften, but they warmed. "That you're not invisible." Rachel's throat closed. For a second, she could not speak at all. She looked down at her hands, flowers still caught in the lines of her skin, hands that had fed others while she went hungry for kindness. Around them the auction continued, but the sound changed. It was quieter, watchful. People kept glancing toward the corner table, trying to figure out what kind of man would put his name and money beside Rachel Hollis. Darla Wren did not like questions she could not answer. Rachel could feel her trying to fix the story in her mind. She would turn it into gossip by morning if she could. Rachel wiped her mouth carefully and said, "You don't know what you just stepped into." Silas leaned back, calm as ever. "I've stepped into worse than gossip." Rachel's voice shook. "They hate me." Silas's jaw tightened. "Then they're small." Rachel stared. She had heard plenty of people speak about her in the last 3 years. Never like this. Silas picked up his fork again, then paused. "You saw my worth once," he said, quiet. When I was bleeding and half wild on that trail, you saw a man, not a burden. Tonight I'm returning the same. Rachel swallowed hard. I didn't do it for thanks. I know, Silas said. That's why I remember. The words settled between them like a blanket against cold. For a few minutes they ate without speaking. Rachel found herself breathing easier. The tight band around her chest loosened. She did not feel pretty. She did not feel small. But for the first time in a long time, she felt present. Then Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. He hesitated like he wasn't sure he should show it. Rachel frowned. What is that? Silas's gaze stayed on hers. A request, he said. If you're willing. Rachel's heart started beating hard again. What kind of request? Silas unfolded the paper, and Rachel saw writing on it, neat and careful, not like a mountain man's hand at all. Her stomach flipped with fear and hope mixed together. Silas slid the paper across the table. Read it, he said. And tell me if I'm a fool. Rachel's fingers hovered over the page. The room around her faded. All she could hear was her own heartbeat and the faint scrape of fiddle strings. She picked up the paper. And the first line made her eyes sting. Mae Hollis held the paper like it might crumble in her hands. The words were written clean and careful, each line spaced as if the writer wanted room for breath. It was addressed to her, not to the widow, not to Mrs. Hollis out of duty, to Rachel Mae Hollis, like her name still belonged in a good sentence. She read the first line again, just to be sure. Mrs. Hollis, I am a man who has lived too long without a home. I would like to change that. Her eyes blurred. She blinked fast, but the sting stayed. Silas Granger watched her without pushing. He did not reach for the paper. He did not fill the silence with nervous talk. He sat steady, hands resting on the table, as if he had already decided he could face whatever answer came. Rachel kept reading. You showed me mercy on the Ridge Trail when you did not have to. You fed me and cleaned my wound, and you did not ask what I could give you. I have not forgotten it. A lump rose in her throat. She glanced up, and Silas's eyes held hers, calm but honest. This is yours? She whispered. Silas nodded once. I can't read good, he said. But I can speak plain. I asked the schoolteacher to write what I said, word for word. That's why it's so neat. Rachel's mouth opened, then closed again. The thought of him standing in a schoolhouse, asking for help with a letter meant for her, hit her harder than the $12 bid. Not because it was grand, but because it was humble. A proud man choosing effort over pride. She looked back down. I am not asking for charity. I am not offering pity. I am asking for company, a warm table, a voice in the evening. A woman with a kind heart who knows what hard living is. Rachel's fingers trembled against the edge of the page. She could feel people staring from across the room, but for once their eyes did not decide who she was. The words on this paper did. She read the last part, slower, because her heart knew something was coming. If you would allow it, I would like to call on you proper, not as a passing friend. Not as a story folks laugh about. I would like to know you, Rachel, and if the Lord is willing, I would like you to be my wife. Rachel's breath stopped. The room seemed to tilt. For a moment, she could only hear the fire popping in the hearth, and the far-off fiddle dragging out a tune that sounded like longing. Silas leaned forward just a little. Before you answer, he said, I need you to hear me. Rachel lifted her eyes. Silas's voice stayed low, but it carried with the weight of a promise. I don't care what them women say. I don't care what the boys in the tavern laugh about. I don't care what a man thinks he can take from you with a joke. I paid what I paid because your work is worth it, and you are worth it. Rachel's eyes burned again. She pressed her lips tight, trying to hold her face steady, trying not to let the whole room watch her break open. I don't understand, she managed. Why me? Silas did not flinch from the question. Because you're the only person in Elk Ridge who treated me like I was human when I was laid out and bleeding, he said. And because I've watched this town treat you like you're less than human, That don't sit right with me." Rachel swallowed. "You don't know what they can do when they want someone gone." Silas's jaw tightened. "I do know," he said. "I've lived in places where a man gets judged for the cut of his coat and the dirt on his boots. I've lived in cabins so far from town that wolves were my only neighbors. Folks in town don't scare me." Rachel stared at him. His steadiness should have made her feel safe. Instead, it made her afraid of hoping. Because hope was the thing that hurt most when it broke. Darla Wren chose that moment to step in. She walked over with her two friends trailing behind, smiles pulled tight, eyes bright with the thrill of control. Darla's voice came out, sweet as syrup. "Mr. Granger," she said, "we were all surprised by your generosity. Folks are wondering if you're feeling well." A few snickers rose from nearby tables, then died quickly when Silas looked up. Silas's gaze was flat. "I'm feeling fine," he said. Darla tilted her head. "Then maybe you can explain. $12 for a pie no one wanted." "Some might call that foolish." Rachel's hands curled around the paper. She waited for Silas to laugh it off, to step back, to save himself from the trouble of standing beside her. Instead, he stood. When Silas Granger rose, the table felt smaller. The lantern light caught the hard lines of his face and the gray in his beard. He did not shout. He did not insult Darla the way she deserved. His calm was sharper than any raised voice. "You said no one wanted it," Silas replied, "but what you meant was you didn't want it." Darla's smile twitched. "I'm only thinking of the auction's fairness." Silas nodded slowly. "Fairness," he said. "Like how you speak loud enough to cut a woman down, then call it concern." A hush spread outward, table by table, until the whole trading post seemed to lean in. Silas looked past Darla, letting his eyes sweep the crowd. "Rachel Hollis fed me when I was hurt," he said, voice steady. "She helped a boy in the street today when his mama didn't have time. She's worked hard and kept her head up in a town that's been trying to push it down." Darla lifted her chin. "And what does that have to do with bidding on a pie?" Silas turned his eyes back to her. "It has to do with worth," he said. "Some folks measure worth by waistlines and fancy dresses and who sits where. I measure it by character, by what a person does when nobody's clapping." Rachel's throat tightened so hard she could barely breathe. Darla's cheeks flushed. "This isn't your place to lecture our community." Quote. Silas stepped closer, not threatening, just solid. "It became my place when I spoke with my money," he said. "And if you want to keep talking, I'll keep answering." The silence was heavy. Darla glanced around, expecting support. But people were watching now, not laughing. Men who had made crude jokes earlier stared at their hands. A few older women looked uncomfortable, like they remembered Levi and felt shame stir where it had been asleep. Darla saw the room slipping from her grip, so she aimed at Rachel instead, voice dropping into a sweet knife. "Rachel," she said, "be careful. A man like Mr. Granger is a mountain drifter. He comes in, makes a scene, then leaves, and you'll be the one left holding the shame." Rachel's heart slammed in her ribs. That fear had lived inside her for years. It was the fear that kept her quiet, the fear that kept her alone. Silas looked at Rachel, then back at Darla. "I'm not leaving," he said. Darla's laugh was thin. "You can't promise that." Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He set it on the table, then loosened the tie. Coins and folded bills showed inside, more money than Rachel had ever seen so close. "I came into town today to settle accounts," Silas said, calm as stone. "I showed up early. I spoke with the trading post owner. I bought supplies for winter, and I asked about land." The room stirred. Rachel's stomach turned. Silas's eyes stayed on Darla, but his words were for everyone. "I bought the cabin and pasture just north of Widow Hollis's place," he said. "The one old Ezra Boone has been trying to sell since his sons moved south." A sharp whisper ran through the crowd. Rachel's breath caught. "You what?" she whispered. Silas turned to her, and for the first time his calm cracked enough to show feeling. "I did it so I could be close," he said. "So I could call on you without riding half a day. So if you said yes, you wouldn't have to leave the land your husband built with you." Rachel's eyes filled. She shook her head once, slow. "You didn't have to do that." Silas nodded. "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." Quote, Darla's mouth opened, then closed again. She had come to shame Rachel. Instead, she had given Silas a stage. She tried one last time. "This is improper," she snapped. "A man buying land for a widow he barely knows. Folks will talk." Silas's gaze did not move. "Let them," he said. He turned then, facing the whole trading post. "Talk if you need to," he said. "But understand something. Rachel Hollis is a good woman. If you've treated her like she's less than you, you ought to be ashamed. And if any man thinks he can laugh at her again, he can come laugh in my face." The words were not a threat the way young men threatened. It was a boundary. Clear and firm. The kind that made trouble think twice. Silas sat back down like he had not just shifted the air in the room. Rachel stared at him, stunned. Her fingers still held the letter. Her chest felt too full, like she had been holding her breath for 3 years, and her body did not know how to take it all in at once. Silas spoke softer now, meant for her. "You don't have to answer tonight," he said. "I didn't write that letter to corner you. I wrote it because it was true. I'd like to come by your cabin tomorrow, in daylight, and talk like 2 grown people. If you say no, I'll still buy your pie every harvest auction until I'm in the ground." A shaky laugh tried to rise in Rachel, but tears came instead. She wiped her cheeks fast, angry at herself for crying in public, but the tears would not stop. Not because she was weak, because she was being seen. Across the room, the auctioneer cleared his throat and tried to restart the bidding on the next pie. People half joined in, but their eyes kept drifting back to Rachel's table. A few women looked at Rachel differently now. Not kinder, not yet, but less sure. Rachel took a long breath and looked down at the letter again. Her mind raced with every reason this could go wrong. The town's gossip. The way happiness could be snatched away. The fear of being fooled. The fear of being chosen and then dropped. But there was also another voice inside her, quiet but stubborn. The voice that had kept her alive through lonely winters. The voice that had carried her up rocky slopes for apples. She looked at Silas and heard herself speak. "Tomorrow," Rachel said, voice trembling but clear. "You can come tomorrow." Silas's eyes held hers. "All right," he said softly. Rachel swallowed. "And thank you for tonight." Silas nodded once. "You're welcome," he said, "but don't thank me for seeing what's true." Rachel sat back in her chair, hands still around the letter, heart still pounding. Because tomorrow would change everything. And as she watched Silas Granger stand to leave,